This is apropos. India and Pakistan have been exchanging heavy artillery fire along their contested border after New Delhi launched deadly missile strikes on its nuclear-armed neighbour overnight. In the worst violence between the two nations in 2 decades. At least 43 deaths have been reported, 31 civilians killed by the Indian strikes and at least 12 dead from Pakistani shelling. The escalation comes 2 weeks after India blamed Islamabad for backing an attack on Hindu tourists in the disputed Kashmir region. With the latest, here's Kaminat.
In the town of Muzaffarabad, residents carry the coffin of a victim killed in an overnight missile attack and place it in an ambulance. India launched deadly strikes in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir on Wednesday, targeting what it calls terrorist infrastructure. Pakistan says civilians and mosques were hit across several locations.
Everyone was asleep, and then there was a sound of an explosion. Our neighbor and his daughter were injured in the attack. They barely managed to reach the hospital late at night.
The attack comes in response to gunmen storming an Indian-controlled portion of Kashmir last month, killing 26 people, mostly Indian tourists. Delhi blames Pakistan for backing the militant attack, which Islamabad denies.
Despite a fortnight having passed since the attacks, there has been no demonstrable step from Pakistan to take action against the terrorist infrastructure on its territory or on territory under its control. Instead, all it has indulged in are denials and allegations.
Pakistan has called it an act of war and says it shot down 5 Indian Air Force jets and a drone in self-defence. India saying several of its civilians were killed by Pakistani shelling.
It is India which cowardly attacked Pakistan and violated our territorial integrity and sovereignty. Pakistan reserves the right and will respond to this aggression at a time, place and means of our own choice.
Tensions between the two nuclear-armed neighbours have long been high in the Kashmir region. India, which has a Hindu majority, and Pakistan, which is mostly Muslim, each control parts of Kashmir but claim it in full. The UN Secretary-General says the world cannot afford a military confrontation between the two powers.
Well, to discuss the consequences of the Indian missile attack and what might happen next, we're joined by Sudhir Selvaraj, Assistant Professor in Peace Studies and International Development at the University of Bradford. Thanks for being with us on the programme this evening. Firstly, how significant was this Indian attack and how do you expect Pakistan to respond? We saw missiles hitting Punjab for the first time since the 1970s.
So this was a response that has been in the works for the last few days. We've seen certain high-level meetings led by Prime Minister Modi and his cabinet members. So a military response was inevitable in the coming days. We can see that since 2016 and 2019, the previous attacks, which were responded to by a surgical strike and airstrikes, this response was stronger and more targeted than it was in the past. So we can see an escalation in military responses from the Indian government in response to what it perceives to be terrorist attacks across the line of control. In response, Pakistan has promised to launch further retaliatory attacks. And as you played in the clip earlier, it's uncertain when, where, and what way it could be.
And do you think at this point there's a risk of all-out war breaking out between the two?
I think it's important to know that right now nobody particularly wants a war. Wars between India and Pakistan, two rivals that who have honestly a lot in common at different points of time, but as a result of partition and colonial legacy, have had 70 years of conflict between the two countries. War will not help either group. Even though the conflict is portrayed as being between India and Pakistan, it is not just these two players in the scene. China has a significant role as Pakistan's portrayed to be all-weather friend, and the US is significantly backing India. And neither the US or China would want an all-out escalation either. So all-out war is going to be costly. Both sides know it, and both sides are going to try to avoid it at all costs. And this is going to be largely seen as the big players trying to mediate that as well.
Well, you mentioned China and you mentioned the US there. Who, in your view, is actually best placed to mediate? The US would have done this during times of previous crises.
In different ways. And I think a mediator doesn't necessarily have to come from either of these two, but both sides have urged caution. Both Foreign Minister and the Secretary of State of the United States have urged caution and seeking a quick resolution of this particular conflict. But we have also seen the Foreign Secretary of Iran visit Pakistan in the last 2 days. And this is the first foreign leader that has visited Pakistan since the Pahalgam attacks last week. So the mediator might not necessarily come from Pakistan, from China or the US, but it might come from another party as well.
And India really appeared to be attempting to draw a line under what happened with this military missile strike. What do you think can be done practically to diffuse tensions between the two at this point?
It's important the language that India has used following the attacks. They've talked about it being measured and justified. And particularly the rhetoric from the Indian government side is that it was largely targeting terrorist infrastructure and not necessarily civilians. Pakistan government claims on the opposite side that civilians were impacted and also launched retaliatory strikes. What could happen in the future is uncertain. I do want to stress that. But a range of options are available. But at this time, we would particularly think that Pakistan would not want to further escalate already precarious situation. But we will have to wait and see.
And who actually will make this decision in Pakistan? The government there is quite weak. The military has long been the most powerful institution there. And the head of Pakistan's armed forces, he's known to be an ideological hardliner when it comes to India.
At this stage, we could see a response coming from either side, either from the army or from the government, and in different combinations of the two. But at this stage, largely, we have to understand that the rhetoric on both sides is building up an already precarious situation. Both sides are claiming a hyper muscular nationalism, talking about these being acts of aggression, and we must respond. So in certain ways, both governments are approaching this in a way that needs to be de-escalated in itself. And particularly in this universe where social media and 24-hour news cycles tend to escalate some of the rhetoric around these things. But hopefully that dies down pretty soon.
And in the longer term, how do you think the Kashmir dispute can actually be resolved? We had Pakistan's ambassador to France speaking with us here on the channel earlier this evening. She was calling on the international community to play a role when it comes to finding a longer term solution.
This is the age-old question. This is a question that has been in play for about 75 years. Where it comes from is still uncertain because at different points of time, the UN has played an active role in trying to broker a peace. The US has as well. But with each passing year, what has been certain is that the plebiscite promised to the Kashmiri people tends to be covered up and further away from reach. Any lasting solution would have to involve India, Pakistan, and the people of Kashmir. Whether who it is brokered by is a whole different story.
And how do the people in Kashmir view all of this, particularly those in the Indian-administered region? Just explain to us, if you can, why exactly the region is so contested.
Absolutely. So while Kashmir is wholly, I apologize. Kashmir is partly claimed by Pakistan and partly claimed by India, and is separated along a line of control. And this is a historical conflict that starts off in 1947 at the time of partition. Kashmir along that line over the last 75 years has fought 3 wars have been fought over Kashmir for this particular space. The conflict started in 1947, where separating a Muslim Pakistan from a secular India. And each princely state was given the choice over who they would support. Kashmir was governed by the Maharaja Hari Singh, a Hindu leader with a largely Muslim population. However, the Maharaja chose to accede to India at the time signing an ascension document in response to a tribal uprising at that particular point in time. But since that, in 1947, there's been a large conflict that has not been resolved and has led to many, many bloodsheds across the country.
And what we're seeing now, how does that compare to previous crises?
Well, we see it in different ways. So, for example, the trigger for this particular conflict came last week with the Pahalgam attack. And in particular, this was largely seen as worse than before because it targeted civilians. 26 civilians died, mostly Indian men, and one Nepalese man as well. So since then, the response has been significant. A few days after the Pahalgam attacks, India suspended the Indus Water Treaty Agreement. Now, this treaty is significant because the Indus River is seen as a lifeline for Pakistan's irrigation facilities and a large part of its GDP. Now, over the last 70 years, it has never been put into serious question, despite wars and conflicts that the two states have been in play. But this time, backed by a muscular nationalism, particularly from India's side, India keen on projecting itself of being worthy of global stature. Remember, this is coming around the same time as J.D. Vance's visit to the U.S., to India, when there were strong U.S.-India trade talks going on. Yesterday, India and UK announced the massive trade deal, which is significant. India is also making a stake to larger claims of talking about how the UN needs to be reconfigured to reflect contemporary power balances amongst the great powers. So it is a particularly different time, largely from politics, but who's in power in India and who's in power in the US, and of course, who's in power in Pakistan.
Sudhir, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us this evening. That's Sudhir Selvaraj, Assistant Professor in Peace Studies at the University of Bradford.